Welcome to the Vertical MRO Podcast, where we dive into the world of helicopter maintenance, repair, and overhaul. In each episode, we talk with the technicians, engineers, and experts who keep helicopters flying. Because at the end of the day, no maintenance, no mission.
You guys here familiar with the term root canal? You're a dentist. Freight can be considered a bit like a root canal. It's a pain, it's expensive, but would you trust a dentist who just got qualified last week to do your root canal? Likewise, the MROs that are out here, some are getting smarter at working with the forwarders. There's a Canadian company here that is disassembling aircraft as part of their contracts, working with forwarders, managing the whole process. So it's a turnkey with knowledge and experience. It's no longer just dump it on DHL and turn my mind and not worry about it. You cannot do that anymore.
I think we're going to see here in the near future that between Canada and US, it's going to be an increase of utilizing that. The days of using a FedEx, UPS, all-in-one service, we're seeing that is just not working.
Welcome to the Vertical MRO Podcast, brought to you by Vertical Plus. This episode was recorded live in Kelowna during the 2025 MRO conference and features a panel discussion on one of the most critical and often overlooked parts of aviation operations, cross-border logistics. And since everyone on the MRO team is currently doing what maintainers and logistics folks do best, being extremely busy, you're stuck with me, producer David, for this intro. You'll hear from Don Lockie of Aviation Resources Group and John Ross, the logistics supervisor at HeliCASTS, as they break down the real-world challenges of moving parts, equipment, and assets across international borders and what it takes to get it right. Before we get into it, if you've enjoyed these panel conversations, this is exactly what the Vertical MRO conferences are built for. It's a rare opportunity to connect with operators, maintainers, and industry leaders, learn from real-world experience, and engage with students and aspiring aviation professionals supporting the future workforce for our rotorcraft MRO. Tickets are now available for the 2026 Vertical MRO Conference, October 5th to 7th in Kelowna, and November 16th to 18th in Irving, Texas. Now let's get into the episode.
Thank you to this episode's sponsors, Metro Aviation and Rotorcraft Support, Inc. Welcome back to Vertical MRO. Our next panel conversation is going to be on cross-border shipping. Can't start without thanking Navigate, who made this conversation possible. Don came to us all the way from New Zealand, and New Zealand is not close to here, as I've been told. Navigate made that transportation possible and this conversation possible. So please extend our thank you to Navigate for investing in this conversation. This is huge. So as the last panel conversation went, we started to dip our toes into some of the conversation surrounding cross-border shipping. Just to have this conversation, I want to introduce our guests. So Don, we'll start with you. If you could just introduce yourself and let us know a little bit about your background, and we'll go from there.
Thanks, John. And firstly, thanks to Vertical Group for getting us out over here. It's a bit of it is a privilege, and this is an amazing show, and I think it's got a really good future. So much more easy to get around than some of those bigger shows down at HAI that we all know about. My background, I currently run a consultancy business called ARG, Aviation Resources Group, but prior to that I came back, I had a little time away from industry, running a company called Redford Aviation Logistics, where we shipped helicopters primarily and assets for effectively 18 years, moving just under 2,000 airframes world globally, and we did that from based in New Zealand. And our core reasoning for getting into that was my background was aviation, was a little bit of spanner turning, a little bit of flying, and then eventually I had to grow up and get myself a real job, so I got into logistics. And that was because there was no flying jobs at the time I was after. And then from there, I saw an opportunity and built a business out of that. And I think the key thing for me with aviation and what we do is the forwarding industry has to learn and needed to learn how to handle your business. And we did a pretty good job of that. So now I'm back from a sort of semi-retirement to come back in and provide a sort of support services and guidance, especially during these more complex period.
Yeah, the term logistics that he brought up, I think really is a good term to describe what we're talking about. When you think about the missions that we complete, you think about all the people that are responsible for making those missions happen. It's not, the air crew, not just the maintainers, but it's also the logistics behind a lot of these missions. A lot of these parts are crossing international lines as they're either being worked on or shipped overseas for these missions to be successfully completed. So the logistics behind that I find fascinating. Things that I don't even consider as an operator, as a pilot, what goes into place to make these things happen. So we'll talk about that a bit and some of the nuances that go with that. John, if you could just introduce yourself, a little bit about your background, and we'll go from there.
Thanks, John. John Ross from Eagle Copters. I've worked at Eagle for 20 years. I've been within the supply chain asset group for 19 of those 20 years at Eagle, and as a logistics supervisor in various roles for the last 15. On the daily, I have a team that I'm leading on shipping, receiving, involved with the customs clearance of inbound and outbound customs from Canada, as well as oversee all of our asset movements around the world. So we work very closely with our customers to ensure that aircraft parts make it to the destination on time and in the condition that they expected on arrival. So I'm hoping to bring some of that knowledge and experiences to this panel today.
Thank you guys for joining us. I have to give kudos to Leslie Ferry. When she selected the panelists, she really had a strategy and a goal in mind. And I think the strategy and goal with these two folks was one, to have an operational perspective on cross-border shipping, and obviously the logistics side with Don. So this would be a really interesting conversation, I think. And I think somebody might be thinking, okay, why am I here? How does this apply to what I'm doing? So Don, for you, when you think about your job and the things you do in logistics, can you talk about a situation where you effectively made something happen, a mission happen, because of your ability to navigate the logistics community?
Yeah, sure, John. I think these stories can go on and they can be a little bit, time for a beer, let's start. But no, let's try and trim one that's quite interesting. We did a lot of work in the past for the leaseors. This particular leaseor had a contract with machines, and 225s, they were 225s, and they were isolated on a West African country. There'd been a regime change, the assets had to get out fast. And essentially what had happened was the contract had been cancelled, the aircraft had been pushed to the back of the airfield. And we had a scenario where we had a 4-day period to effectively pull, at that time, $60 million US worth of asset out. Otherwise, they were going to be write-offs. What we had in that situation was a case where we had to move really quickly. We had to essentially bolt ourselves onto the company that owned those assets, but then beyond that, the operators that actually were working those assets. From there, we had to work in with chartering an aircraft. In this case, it was an Antonov. We worked with the authorities that were leasing those. We had to work with United, with a particular country that was involved. And the long story short was we were successful in the objective, but it required total partnership on all parties and also full understanding that money's going to be made. I think what tends to happen often in our industry is the forwarders will tend to buy your business because that's the only way they get it. What we had to do in that situation, where there was a lot of money had to be transferred to keep the thing flowing, right through to the extent, as a tail end of this job, we had the aircraft, the Antonov down, we had the 3 aircraft loaded. A lot of stories about that. We were all ready to go. The crew were buttoning up the aircraft, and out of nowhere came a high-vis vehicle with flashing lights, and out comes a guy in uniform, struts across and states there has to be a takeoff fee payable, which was, well, we've all paid the charges. So then it was this on-the-street negotiation, basically, which eventually involved an agreement based on the weight of the 3225s, a per kilo rate charge, and then essentially a man literally with a briefcase coming out, flicking it open, pulling out wads of US dollars. So we got into an industry there where, you kind of have to be completely adaptable. Your goal is X, to get these assets and get them to their storage facility, but you're constantly adapting. And I think that's where our industry now is going through with, a certain president with a similar name as myself has created these issues, creating your border issues that you're now dealing with, and we listened to a lot before. Does that kind of give a bit of a rundown on the scenarios, John?
Yeah, what's interesting is it's not just understanding the customs obligations that we have to navigate this stuff. It's also somewhat of understanding the culture and how to navigate some of the cultural stuff that you're describing, some of the challenges that might exist in certain countries because of that. So it'll be interesting to walk through your expertise and kind of give some folks some ideas on how to navigate those challenges. John, for you, from an operator's perspective, can you talk about a situation where this was a challenge for you and how you overcame that?
Yeah, absolutely. Just as Don touched on there, every country, depending on where you're dealing on in the world, every country has little quirks or differences that you have to potentially overcome or be aware of. Sometimes in the scenario could be having to pay more money. We've had a situation where you leverage your freight forwarder to help you in those situations. We had an aircraft out of the Dominican. Bit of a nightmare. It kept getting delayed, first of all. So we wanted to do ocean out of Dominican. We needed to get to Africa. The carrier kept making a port call cancel. So essentially they were just determining they had no reason to come in and take it. So we had to make a change. Our forwarder had to change carriers, make that on the fly. And we also, in that case, had to change the routing. And we had a timeline associated with that. So we tapped into the forwarder and said, how can you get our aircraft? We've already been delayed essentially a month, and we need to still be in Africa in the same time. So our forwarder was able to tap into a couple of essentially his network or their network, and we routed this aircraft up into Europe by boat, and it was a 10-day sailing where they made all the arrangements, on our behalf to have it transferred from a flat rack. For those that know what a flat rack is, it's an open container, bulkhead container, to air freight. And from there, transferred over to Luxembourg and then flown down to Africa. Sounds really simple in the moment here talking about it, but over the course of about a month and a lot of back and forth and, trying not to spike your costs in all these situations, the forwarder in the situation or the logistics specialists that we work with really, really helped maintain our mission to get that aircraft where we needed it. And it really emphasized the key component to moving product around the world and what they can do for you.
I think what you both highlighted is the need for a logistics company to come into play that understands all the nuances that are involved here. Don, when you and I talked about this before, you talked about how quality logistics companies are more expensive, but the return on investment's high. Can you kind of talk to that a little bit before we go to the next topic?
Yeah, well, I guess knowledge is valuable. You guys here familiar with the term root canal? You're a dentist, Freight can be considered a bit like a root canal. It's a pain, it's expensive, but would you trust a dentist who just got qualified last week to do your root canal? So you've got to be sensible about how you plan it. Likewise, the MROs that are out here and the engineering companies that are working, some are getting smarter at working with the forwarders and designing systems where there's a Canadian company here that is disassembling aircraft as part of their contracts, working with forwarders, managing the whole process. So it's a turnkey with knowledge and experience with a stated outcome of goal of what we're trying to get to. And I think that's the future where we're going, is the operators who can look at it and say, well, it's no longer just dump it on DHL and turn my mind and not worry about it. You cannot do that anymore. We've got a complicated period brewing. It's not going to change. Tariffs aren't going away. So that strength in handling the aircraft, how you're going to ship the aircraft, air freight it or sea freight it, the paperwork is correct, and the knowledge of the individuals that you're working, whether it's the engineering company, the freight forwarder, etc.
Yeah, I think the risks associated with the loss of freight in this environment is much different than the package you're getting from Amazon. So the investment you make and what you're talking about is very crucial, and I see the value in that. I'm going to open this up with a really broad question, and I think we'll start with you, John. When you, as an operator, consider the biggest challenges that surround this issue, what would you say that the biggest challenge is for you guys as an operator shipping internationally?
Biggest challenge internationally, having people to work with that understand the country you're importing into and what they are required to do. Exporting, when you're an exporting party in a shipment, exporting out of Canada, I live here. I understand the requirements of exporting. When you need to get something into another country, the consignee or the importer of record, their knowledge it's important to either the consignee, know what they need to do to bring that in, or they have somebody that they work with externally, like a customs broker or a house agent. There's all different names for them around the world. People that understand what you need to do to bring a product into your country. If at any time you don't have that kind of support, it can really cause delays. Outside of North America, it's quite common that you work with customs agents, brokers, house agents. But I think we're going to see here in the near future that between Canada and US, it's going to be an increase of utilizing that. The days of using a FedEx, UPS, in-house, all-in-one service, we're seeing that is just not working. So,
yeah, I just heard a story, someone saying FedEx literally lost an engine. That'd be hard to explain to your boss why you lost an engine or why FedEx lost an engine. So I think, having an understanding of this industry and the logistics behind it's important. Don, from your perspective, anything to add in there? And I guess to the broader question, what's the biggest challenge? Thank you to our sponsor, Metro Aviation. Metro Aviation, the world's largest family-owned aeromedical operator, offers comprehensive aircraft services with 140 plus aircraft in over 25 states. The Completion Center installs medical and law enforcement kits and avionics, serving diverse aviation needs including offshore, utility, VIP, and corporate sectors.
I think the biggest challenge now is complacence, guys. I think we basically, those of us who are old, if we go back to 9/11, we were, in the freight industry, there was almost this book it yourself online, just like now when you book your travel as a passenger on a flight. 9/11 changed that pretty much overnight to new systems, things called RACA, extra security, et cetera, that we're all very familiar with. And the freight industry was no different. What tends to happen is we've also relied on the marketing of the larger players, the integrators, who have come out to you guys and said, look, we've got we're in the house in Leonardo and Milan. It's all good, don't worry, we've got under control. The problem is what they've done is in there, and this is way before the common AI term now coming up everywhere. This is what was evolving over the last, basically pre-COVID, throughout COVID, a reduction in manpower per job numbers. So these forwarders are now operating purely on high turnover, pretty much green lane traffic. So when we come along with something that's unusual, when you guys come along with something that's 3.4 meters long, it's super fragile, it's got turbine, it's got et cetera, their systems don't cope. And with due respect, the sales rep will give you the okay to do it, you dump it on them, you book online, and then wonder why it goes wrong and FedEx loses it. You've really got to take some self-responsibility and start taking ownership of your freight, and start working on the OEMs and your major suppliers, and not fall into the trap of letting them choose your logistics. Take some ownership, understand it, make your choices based on good choices. It will still go wrong, but if you don't let it go, if it goes wrong, at least you know you did all the right options for it. Yeah, so I think it's really take complacence out of it, look at the risk factors, minimize those, and move forward.
Another really broad question for you. If you were to think about, from your perspective, the 3 biggest lessons you've learned when it comes to shipping internationally as an operator, whether that's through a negative experience or something that worked because you did something a certain way, are there 3 things you can point to for folks that are sitting here and might find themselves in that situation, be like, hey, this is something that I am faced with now? Anything that comes to mind there?
One for sure, I think, and it's tough in our industry because everybody wants everything yesterday. We work in, and it's not just our industry, but our industry for sure, everybody wants their product, their purchase to be there as soon as possible. Not being prepared, you need time. Time is one of the lessons, and it's hard to find that time sometimes. But time to figure out how am I going to get it from point A to point B. Time to figure out, is the cost that I'm paying for this, does that make sense? So time for sure is one of the biggest lessons, but it's also one of the hardest items to come by, I think, for everybody, because ultimately you want to get that product to you as soon as possible. The other side of that then is your cost. So trying to keep your costs down well, getting something to you as fast as possible. So the balance of those two together, I don't really have three, but those two, I look at that quite often at the cost versus time. What's more important to you? Is getting that to you there faster and in your hands to get it mobilized worth the cost? Are you willing to pay that? Or would you rather, okay, let's take some time. We don't need, we got a couple months till contract or whatnot. How can we save some money and do this in the store? And it could be anything from an ocean freight shipment to an air freight shipment. And for those that have dealt in that, it can be 3-4 times cost difference, but 3 or 4 times faster between those two modes of transport. So I think for sure, for me, a big lesson is understanding what's more important to you, cost or time. And that can change. That's okay. Sometimes one's more important than the other. So absolutely.
And I think part of what you described is a unique situation where you find yourself in a position where you've never dealt with this particular situation before. And so now you're having to figure out how to do this in a quick way. And I think that's where rooms like this, conventions like this, where we're all under one roof and can share these ideas, are valuable. Picking the brains of these guys. Hey, it doesn't have to be during this conference, but hey, I've got this issue. I've now got a phone number to call. How did you deal with this? I feel like oftentimes we feel like we have to reinvent the wheel all the time, but we've got all these peers in this network that we can utilize to answer questions that we find ourselves trying to answer. So I think these kind of conversations are huge. So I'll shift gears to you now. When you think of maybe the 3 biggest lessons learned that these folks can avoid, what would you say those 3 biggest lessons are?
Stay the hell out of freight. Once upon a time I had a full head of hair and it wasn't grey. Look, it's a good industry, and I think the reality is the rotary sector is a good industry. It's small. Sure, there's a large number. We don't know everybody, but there is a sort of camaraderie. And I think one of the biggest lessons, I'll change it slightly. One of the biggest lessons I learned about rotary when I got involved in it was we're all out there nickel and diming the guy across the road or the other business over there. But the moment, if they're 30 minutes late, your ear picks up. If they're an hour late, you start planning. If they're 2 hours late, we're all out there looking for them. And I think there's an incredible loyalty that we have in our game, that we're out there trying to compete, but there's something there about it. And I think that knowledge is something we can be sharing more in that logistics and trying to get across an efficiency. Don't hide the failures. There'll be many of you here know about a nasty event that happened late last year or middle of last year under a bridge near Vancouver. Let's analyze that. Let's not sweep it under the carpet and leave it to the lawyers and insurance companies. Let's try and work out where did the mistakes go wrong and start as an entity, as a part of the rotary industry, sharing our knowledge out there, using the forums that exist. And I'm not social media, but I know there must be that ability to do it. I guess the other key lesson that came out of it is cheap is not necessarily good. Obviously, like all things, cheap can be good, and if it's in the right environment, or if you're taking a risk because the component you're moving, you've got 6 of them on the shelf, not a problem. But if you're taking the risk with one component and you're going OIG next week, it doesn't need to be said, does it?
This topic's, there's a lot of nuances, so we're trying to stay out of the weeds as much as we can, but something as simple as a blade box and understanding how that timber that blade box is shipped in might impact that blade box being imported into a country. Can you talk about, Don, we'll start with you, some of those small considerations and maybe start with the timber?
Yeah, well, timber, kind of put a show of hands here of who's heard of HSPM 15? Right, not too many. Okay. Timber is, obviously, it's a live product, it's cellular, and a lot of countries, including Canada, incredibly paranoid about bugs and et cetera. So timber has to be treated. And the ISPM treated system is an international coded system that needs to be utilized for any timber that moves between countries. Now, there's 2 cases I know of personally where helicopters have got to Delta Port in Vancouver, packed badly by non-specialized MROs. The not correct freight forwarders involved. And both those helicopters in the end were returned back to the origins after about 6 weeks on Delta Port. Costs were astronomical, and at the end of the day, both those aircraft were written off due to issues. And that all dealt down to the fact of some timber that was not compliant to the ISP M15 regs. So look at your timber. It has a little symbol on the bottom. If I had a whiteboard, I'd show it to you, but it basically looks like a bit of wheat with a little stick on it, and it has a number and a country of origin. So here, New Zealand would be NZ 1234. That is the code. Those codes are very difficult there's quite a procedure involved. They can't be fraudulent, and that's just a very key part. Hence, you'll see the likes now, the Airbus now effectively putting their blade boxes now made out of carbon fiber. Sikorsky is traditionally aluminium, but you're still seeing out of Leonardo wood, and you'll see that in Bell more wood as well, I believe, still. So it's just checking that sort of stuff, making sure that if you're moving the asset, the timber used as dunnage or support is approved. If not, ask your freight professional, check with them, and ask the question. If they're stalling you, red flashing light should be flashing. Go talk to somebody else.
John, for you, any insight as it relates to that, or you brought up packing, from your perspective, any advice you have for packing things in a way that kind of prevents what he's talking about? Thank you to our sponsor, Rotorcraft Support. Rotorcraft Support, from the hangar floor to the flight line. We've spent 40 years caring for the aircraft that communities rely on every day. Rotorcraft Support, where dedication meets decades of experience.
Well, yeah, on both. Well, I'll just touch on the ISPM 15. It's interesting. We really got involved with that when we started shipping to Australia. Australia is one of these countries that has a lot of controls on what they're importing. They don't want dirt. They don't want bark. They don't want anything. You just got to have clean timbers. So when you start diving into knowing where you're shipping, understanding the country requirements of where you're shipping, ISPM 15, it's not something you can just do at your facility. You can't just build a crate and stamp it. So you find vendors or suppliers locally. If you're lucky, we have a supplier in Calgary that we work with very closely, very reasonably priced to make proper crates, and we base our crates packing on OEM specs. So when we're shipping Bell blades, our crates are built very similar to what you'd get out of Bell. We have made our own modifications at times to support the projects we're working on, for packing purposes, for how we transport the shipment across the world. But knowing, again, how or what you need to get that into the country, so you're not getting held to the point where Australia can burn your shipment, right? A country has the right to destroy the goods if it doesn't meet the requirements of import. I don't think anybody here would want a multi-million-dollar aircraft that you've shipped across the country or across the world to all of a sudden get garbage, trashed. So again, it's going to tie into the people you work with, forwarders, vendors that know the requirements. When I call them, I say, I need an ISPM 15 box going to Australia. They know what that means. Different than an ISPM 15 going to the US. The packing. We work very hard to pack our stuff based on OEM spec.
Something that seems to be a hot topic when it comes to shipping and logistics is lithium-ion batteries. Any insight from you guys on dealing with that?
It's a pain in the butt. Dangerous goods, right? And lithium-ion batteries are found in so many products today. Everything from laptops to cameras to whatever. We haven't had to deal too much. When we're shipping, with the FedExes and that in most cases with those types of products. If you start going down the route of airlines, that's where it starts becoming more of a problem. So training your shippers, there should be some basic training in dangerous goods handling. You have a responsibility as a shipper to be knowledgeable what you're handing over to a carrier to carry for you. So, if you're putting your employees through the proper training for what they're handling, that's gonna help you and keep you from hopefully not running into an issue with that.
John, can I just make a little backup on that too? Again, how many of you guys have seen a dangerous goods certificate? How they look with the red trim around the outside? I've experienced those a little bit. Yeah, great. If you're ever in a position where you are asked to sign one on behalf of somebody, remember that when you sign a DG cert, you are personally signing it. It's not signing it on behalf of the company, the operator, anything like that, personally. So if an event occurs and there's a loss of life, you're up for manslaughter. So treat a DG cert for exactly what it is, a dangerous goods certification. Most reasonable sized cities will have a freight forwarder who has the expertise and currency on lithium, and it's a constantly changing goalposts in that field. Work with them. They can sign on your behalf if no one in your company has the qualification to sign it. They'll charge you for it, but and they'll demand a set of steps. The other thing is, if it's DG, it has to be packaged correctly. That information now is very, very available, easily available online to research. Simply go into UN DG codes, and you can work out if you've got a shipment, it's how small the bottles have to be and what packaging. Again, your forwarder will do that. But, study up on it before you have to do it is going to put you in a better position to negotiate and give you more strength to make it work. But I can't write that strong enough from personal experience. We had a shipment which an aircraft leaked. The documents have been declared that it was no all fuel had been removed. It went air freight. It started leaking. It involved an aircraft grounding. It involved security, police. Became a very, very complicated situation. And unfortunately, a young woman who worked for that particular organization was told by her boss, sign this, it's okay. And she signed the document declaring there was no fuel. And the result was that she was actually dragged through the legal system, which was a pretty devastating thing for a 21-year-old young woman trying to build a career because her boss told her to do it. So don't don't regard it as something that you can just get away with, please. That's about as serious I get, by the way, guys.
So I think that takes care of the biggest lesson learned.
Yeah, true.
We made it about 30 minutes, a little over 30 minutes without the topic of ITAR and tariffs coming up.
That's good.
It's time to interject that. And I will say, what my goal is to wrap this conversation up in about 10 minutes and open the floor to you guys for questions for these folks. But before we do that, let's talk about ITAR and tariffs and some advice you might have for folks when they deal with that.
You want to take this one for a minute? I'll do ITARs. You do the tariffs because it's your board.
Yeah, I'm gonna split up ITAR and tariffs. ITAR, I'm gonna touch more on tariffs at the moment, as I'm sure a lot of people in this room, everybody, even as a consumer, is affected by tariffs right now. At Eagle, we dove into when 6-7 months ago when this all started coming through, we dove into it big time. I was right in the middle trying to dissect what's going on. How's it going to affect us? We have deliveries that could potentially be affected into the U.S. All eyes on the U.S. to see, what's happening today, what's going to happen tomorrow. For the most part, and we hear a lot about it today. Carney was just down in the States yesterday. I know we didn't get any answers really, but the tariffs themselves, the CUSMA agreement that we have has been a good deal for, I think, our industry in the sense of moving parts back to the U.S. or aircraft to the U.S. Eagle itself deals a lot in U.S. manufactured goods, and the tariffs are not applied necessarily to U.S. made goods. So the U.S. is wanting everything to be made there. That's the idea behind that, is they're trying to draw the manufacturing process and all that into the U.S. and the goods be made there. So the struggle that we've really run into with the tariff side of things is they lifted the de minimis rule, which was anything under $800 with the FedExes, the UPS. That stuff was just kind of freely flowing between Canada and the U.S. You really didn't even hear. Every now and then something might get questioned, but it was very easy moving. When they lifted that, those packages, tens of thousands of packages at UPS and FedEx and DHLs, whoever you use there, are now having to put all that through a clearance process that wasn't necessarily there before. they don't have systems in place to manage that. They weren't prepared for it. I recently spoke with our FedEx rep. They hired 300 clearing agents in the US to try and help with this influx of package clearing. Aside from that, so that's just part of it. So you have this huge inflow, you don't have systems in place nor people to manage that new level of requirement. Then you have customs itself who controls what actually happens. So what customs is now doing, for instance, with a FedEx, that's who we deal with mostly. FedEx, they call it caging a shipment. So the customs agent will be like, I want that package. They'll take it off the line at FedEx and essentially hold it at their leisure. They may have additional questions, documents. What's happening there is we don't know what they're actually going to ask for. They might want more proof of country of manufacture, which it ties into the melt and pour. I'm sure I was talking with some people out here the last couple of days about the requirements of documentation into the US. And all this it's compounding into delays that we can't predict are going to happen. We've never seen them before. And, we're now trying to figure out how can we avoid it. It's pretty hard to avoid it because you got to go through some kind of custom process when you go into a country. How do we minimize it? I really push moving away, and I think Mark touched on it on the last panel. FedEx will offer you an all-in-one product, and this isn't a downplay. It's worked very well, and it does work well. Ship with us, we'll take care of your customs. It'll be good. But what you have is somebody that's doing customs that doesn't necessarily know what your product is. We're dealing in a very unique business. We deal in unique product. You want to work with people that know what you are bringing into the country, or at least you can talk directly to them, and they're going to support you. So a customs broker, I think a lot of people here, anybody import uses custom brokers here in Canada. It's probably pretty common, right? I find, and this is again not a poke at the US, but because of the offerings of the FedExes and the UPS, that's not a common play between Canada and the US to use a customs broker. And bringing that conversation up with our customers now to try and ease this and explain why when you've been getting it, but that's one of our things that we're looking at. We're looking at like how will utilizing a third-party customs broker into the U.S. help reduce the delays we're seeing due to maybe lack of knowledge or lack of not knowing what they actually need to ask for. Because I think just like us, a lot of people in the U.S. don't really know what they're looking for when it comes to the tariff requirements or the documentation, especially on steel, aluminum. So, I really push right now. There's a real benefit to working with a customs broker. They're professionals, just like an AME, just like all the AMEs here. You are a professional in a trade. That's what a customs broker, they are trained to support you in a way with information to help an extension of your business, to help keep your product or get your product into a country that you're dealing in. Now, outside of Canada and the US, it's actually quite common. If anybody is dealing internationally, you're dealing over in Europe, Africa, most of your customers will have a house agent in India, as they call it, or a customs broker that they work with. So it is a common practice around the world to utilize this professional. So I think in the near future here, we're going to see a push from customs brokers because there's just so much there that from an operations standpoint, I can dig and try and understand. We have customers that just want to fly, right? How many of your customers, they just want to fly the helicopter. They just want to keep moving. So we work at Eagle, we work to try and mitigate that and have it, but even I can't answer all those questions. So we bring in that third party who works on your behalf to assist you and hopefully make it easier for you to go across the border.
If you're passionate about rotorcraft maintenance, then be sure to check out Vertical's new Instagram channel at vertical.mro, sharing all things related to helicopter maintenance, repair and overhaul, from the latest podcast episodes to conference updates, and even epic photography. Vertical MRO is dedicated to supporting and advancing rotorcraft maintenance, the backbone of our industry. Don, I see you nodding along as he's talking about all this. Can you talk to that a little bit? elaborate on the need for that specialized knowledge base?
Yeah, look, I think, John, you've hit the nail very well and cleared it. Thank you for that, because your local transgression across the other side of the hill there, it's not my specialty. I guess the thing is, as John mentioned, we've had brokers throughout the rest of the world. Effectively, customs brokers has been very much part of the logistics chain. Going back to when I did have a full header here and no grey, we had things called, we called them routing orders. And they were essentially, you didn't change your customs broker. You treated your customs broker like your lawyer or your accountant. They knew your business intimately. They knew the tariffs well. They knew your business. They knew how to describe this bottle of water and call it a flower vase. They knew how to manipulate the data with the HS system that you guys I'm sure are familiar with. So that is now becoming back in vogue, relying on these guys and girls out there in those teams, because they will be the answer. And there was another part to this earlier question about ITARs. The same thing. ITARs is not actually that frightening as long as the data is accurate. You provide that in advance, build the relationship with your trusted broker, and add that into your costing model that they're going to hit you up $100 a job. So be it. It's chicken feed in the big scheme of things to have that assurity. You've also then got somebody who has an ability legally to talk to the guys. Do your customs officers wear blue shirts? Ours do. Whatever the uniform is, legally talk to them at a legislational level to fight your case, which you guys cannot do if you're in default. So it's a really important relationship to build up. And if you can gain anything out of today from this session with us, look undersea in your not in your yellow pages anymore, but find your broker, form a relationship, and get them round for a coffee.
Yeah, again, talking to the experts, I think is critical in these scenarios. Again, to give us time for Q&A, I'll jump to best piece of advice that you guys can offer for others to where they're not having to navigate some of the experiences that you may have learned these lessons through. You're looking at each other, but so I'll let...
A bit of disclosure, we did a few jobs together in our past life. I guess what were the key things that you got out of working with the forwarding company that my team used to run? Working with you, what worked?
Working with professionals that, again, I touched on it, they know what they're handling. It's not just some Joe Blow saying, yeah, I'll take that. I'll get that from point A to point B for you, no problem. I'll give you a really good deal. And then you get a ball of steel or whatever show up at the delivery point. I think it's key to work with people that know what they're actually working with. And that's in any profession. If you're getting work done on your house, you want a roofer that knows how to roof your house properly to roof your house. When it comes to moving aircraft, moving parts, especially AOG situation, we didn't really touch on that, but if you need that there, you want the person or the company that is handling that for you understand the importance of why it needs to be there as soon as possible, and work with you on ensuring that you have documents, any import requirements, export requirements covered, so you're not creating a delay in that. And a delay, sometimes a 1 day delay can be tens of thousands of dollars. So it's key, work with the professionals that have trained and essentially know what they can support you on. And I think that's a key from working when you had Redford. That was, a company that you worked in moving aircraft. They know what they're handling.
Yeah, I think the theme here is trusting the professional, the folks that actually know how to do this. What I'd like to do is open the floor to questions you guys might have for the folks on the panel.
So you talked about using a broker to essentially trick the system, right? Tell customs agents that that's not bottled water, it's a base. Aren't there harmonized tariff schedules for almost every product that's out there? So why pick the right harmonized tariff schedule for the product?
100%. No, basically what I was getting at is the ability to, the tariff, for those of you, what this gentleman was asking about is the HS tariff system. It's an agreement document that everything has a code, and it's agreed by a multiple number of countries, but majority of the world's countries apply to it. And he's quite correct. This is a bottle of water, but it's more the terminology so that the paperwork is correctly written, not defrauding saying, hey, this is a vase. I use that as a flippant example. More just clearly identifying that the component is a core return, for example, and therefore that is why the value is only $25,000. So wording it correctly, because otherwise it'll show up as an aircraft engine model number, Rolls-Royce 235, whatever, and if it gets stuck because it's declared as 25, and the system is saying aircraft engine should have a minimum value of $250,000, and that's the sort of thing that your broker can work correctly with the process, more than turning it into water into wine, as you say. But no, very valid point, and thank you, because I probably was a bit flippant when I threw that out there.
Any more questions for the panel? Thank you guys for joining us for this. Thank you, Navigate, for making this possible. This conversation wouldn't have happened without their support of this conversation. So thank you guys. There's more panels tomorrow. Clip poll, there's quite a few other ones. Really good conversations. I'm excited for these conversations to continue into the halls outside. So until next time, we'll catch you later. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, John.
Thanks, guys.
Stand by for a message after a word from our sponsors.
Thank you to our sponsor, Metro Aviation. Metro Aviation, the world's largest family-owned aeromedical operator, offers comprehensive aircraft services with 140-plus aircraft in over 25 states. The Completion Center installs medical and law enforcement kits and avionics, serving diverse aviation needs including offshore, utility, VIP, and corporate sectors. Thank you to our sponsor, Rotorcraft Support. Rotorcraft Support, from the hangar floor to the flight line. We've spent 40 years caring for the aircraft that communities rely on every day. Rotorcraft Support, where dedication meets decades of experience. If you're passionate about rotorcraft maintenance, then be sure to check out Vertical's new Instagram channel, @vertical.mro, sharing all things related to helicopter maintenance, repair, and overhaul, from the latest podcast episodes to conference updates, and even epic photography. Vertical MRO is dedicated to supporting and advancing rotorcraft maintenance, the backbone of our industry.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Vertical MRO. If your operations depend on moving parts across borders, this is one of those areas where getting it right makes all the difference in keeping aircraft flying. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to follow the show and share it with a fellow maintainer. And don't forget, tickets are now available for the 2026 Vertical MRO conferences in Kelowna and Irving. We hope to see you there.